They say you
Dangerous
can't ever
Mustang,
really come home.
unrideable.
But as Harper McAllister drove down the cracked two-lane highway, cornfields flickering by in golden waves, she tried to believe that wasn't true. The faded sign that read, "Welcome to Bitterroot Junction, population 4,162, looked smaller than she remembered. Maybe everything did. Harper was 26,
It's all right.
a white woman with sun-bleached
gonna
hair
hurt
and a
you.
past that never quite fit her, no matter how hard she tried. She'd spent the last 6 years in the city, studying, working,
50.
chasing
He's coming home
dreams
with me.
she'd lost the taste for. After graduation, her plans crumbled fast. Her father's illness, her mother's loneliness, and the slow ache for something real had finally called her back to the only place that had ever felt like home. She parked her beat-up Ford outside the old livestock auction barn, paint peeling and the roof patched with sheet metal. Dust and hot wind swirled around her boots as she stepped out. Squinting against the afternoon sun, even from the parking lot, she could hear the auctioneers chant, a relentless, nasal drone rising and falling above the angry bellow of cattle, the clatter of gates, the laughter of rough-handed men. Inside, the barn was chaos. Sweat and sawdust filled the air, mingling with the tang of manure and something sharper, anxiety, maybe, or fear. Dozens of locals crowded the bleachers and ring, some in worn cowboy hats, others in ball caps or work shirts. Harper wove through them, nodding to faces she half remembered, feeling half invisible and out of place all at once. She'd come because her father had once told her, "If you ever need to remember who you are, find the horses. They always know." She wasn't sure she believed that anymore, but she was willing to try. As she found a spot near the ring, the auctioneer's voice boomed over the loudspeaker. "Next up, Lot 96, dangerous Mustang, unrideable. Likely not fit for nothing but the meat truck." Laughter rolled through the crowd, mean and sharp. Harper's gaze followed the handlers as they led in a horse unlike any she'd seen. He was a charcoal gray Mustang, wild and trembling, with a jagged white blaze split down his face. Scars, old and new, marred his coat, angry red and silvery white, ugly patches along his side and hip. One ear was notched, and his mane looked half burned away. Even the way he moved spoke of pain and rage. He threw his head, snorted, eyes rolling white as the crowd jeered. "That one's cursed," a man muttered behind Harper. "Burned up in Cross's barn fire last spring, killed 2 others, they should have put him down." "Worthless," another said. "Only good for glue." Harper felt a strange pull in her chest, a mix of anger and empathy that made her jaw clench. She watched the horse, saw the tremble in his knees, the way he jerked from the handler's rope. And something in his expression, a wild intelligence, a defiant spark, spoke to her in a way she couldn't explain. She remembered every animal she'd tried to save as a kid, every stray she'd nursed back to health, every broken thing she'd tried to mend. The auctioneer barely tried. "Do I hear 200? 150? Hell, I'll take 50. Just get this bastard out of my ring." The crowd laughed. Someone threw a crumpled cup, and the Mustang bolted sideways, crashing into the fence with a metallic clang. Harper didn't flinch. She took a step forward, drawn to the raw, ugly drama playing out in front of her. For a heartbeat, her eyes met the Mustang's, and she saw behind the fear a flash of something that felt like recognition, like the universe had thrown them together on purpose. "No takers? What a surprise. Come on, folks, $50 and he's yours," the auctioneer barked. The handlers tightened their grip, shoving the Mustang back into the center. He reared, hooves slashing the air, nostrils flared, eyes wide with panic. "Someone should just put him out of his misery," a woman called. "That's not misery," Harper heard herself say, barely louder than a whisper. "That's fear." People turned to stare, surprised to hear her voice. Harper barely noticed. She was moving toward the ring before she knew why, her boots echoing against the wooden floor. She passed the old ranchers, the kids clutching their parents' hands, the auction staff. The world shrank down to the trembling Mustang, sweat glistening on his battered coat. As she stood at the edge of the ring, the Mustang's wild eyes fixed on her. The handler looked at her like she'd lost her mind. "Don't get close, miss. He'll tear your face off." Harper just nodded. "Let me try," she said softly. "Just for a minute." The handler hesitated, but the auctioneer, sensing drama and maybe a better bid, motioned her in. "Go on, girl. Just don't sue if he bites." The barn fell quiet. Every eye watched as Harper ducked under the rail and stepped inside. The Mustang snorted, skittered sideways, his whole body tense and ready to bolt. Harper kept her hands low, her voice gentle. "Hey, easy, boy. It's all right. You're not alone." The horse's ears flicked. He pawed the dirt, watching her with suspicion, as if waiting for another blow. Harper's heart pounded, but she pressed on, inch by inch, whispering, breathing slow and steady. The crowd seemed to fade away. The Mustang shivered, muscles rippling. Then, just as Harper reached out a trembling hand, he dropped to one knee. Silence crashed over the barn. In that suspended moment, the horse bowed his head, pressing his scarred face into Harper's palm. Someone gasped. Phones rose, flashes flickered. The impossible was happening right in front of them. Harper closed her eyes, feeling a surge of connection. Pure, raw, undeniable. She knew, in that instant, she could not leave him behind. As the moment broke, the auctioneer cleared his throat, stunned. "Well, looks like we got ourselves a miracle. Do I hear $50? Harper took a breath, dug into her jeans for the last of her savings. 50, she called. "He's coming home with me." The gavel fell, and as the crowd erupted in whispers and disbelief, Harper led the Mustang from the ring. Her heart pounding with hope and terror, and something she hadn't felt in a long time. Purpose. A strange hush still lingered in the air as Harper led the battered Mustang from the ring. Outside the chaos of the auction barn, the late afternoon sun cast sharp lines across the gravel lot. For a moment, Harper and the Mustang stood alone, breathing in the dust, uncertainty thick as the heat shimmering off the ground. She glanced over at the crowd spilling out behind them, a mess of skeptical faces, raised eyebrows, and curious murmurs. Cell phones were still pointed their way, capturing every uncertain step. Harper could hear the muttered comments, crazy, reckless, foolish, riding on the dry wind. She almost turned back, but then she felt the gentle, insistent pull of the lead rope in her hand and looked again into the Mustang's wild, haunted eyes. That connection was still there. Strong, unexplainable. One of the handlers caught up to her at the loading pen, shaking his head. "Ma'am, I've worked these sales 20 years. I ain't never seen nothing like that. You got a death wish or what?" Harper gave a faint, determined smile. "Maybe I just have a little faith." She swallowed, not sure if she was lying to herself. Her fingers trembled as she signed the battered receipt and took ownership of a horse no one else wanted. The paperwork called him Embereth, a name scribbled in rushed block letters on a crumpled file. She traced the brand beneath his tangled mane, a nearly illegible glyph, the mark of some long-gone breeder. She whispered the name as she loaded him into the battered old trailer she'd borrowed from her father, her voice barely audible above the wind. Embereth. But he didn't fight her, not like before. His muscles quivered as she guided him up the ramp, but he went, wary, jumpy, but willing. Harper glanced back at the barn, feeling the weight of every watching eye. Something inside her said this was more than luck or chance. This was fate, kicking down the door and dragging her along for the ride. Just as she latched the trailer gate, someone shouted her name. "Hey, McAllister!" It was Cal Turner, an old classmate, now bulked up and sunburned from years working cattle. He leaned against his truck, smirking. "You rescuing hopeless causes again, Harper? That thing's trouble. They say he burned down Cross's barn and killed a mare." Harper cut him off with a look. "Stories grow every time someone tells them. Horses just want to survive." Cal shrugged, but Harper caught the flicker of respect, or was it envy, in his eyes. She didn't answer, just climbed into her truck and pulled away, heart hammering. In the rearview mirror, the crowd kept watching. A few faces had softened, and a handful of kids waved, their eyes wide with wonder. Back on the road, Harper drove slow, every bump in the pavement echoing in her bones. She was broke now, just a few bucks to her name, and had no idea what tomorrow would bring. But for the first time in months, she felt something close to hope flicker in her chest. When she reached the family ranch, she backed the trailer up to the old corral, nerves jangling. Her parents stood on the porch, concern etched on their faces. Her mother called out, "Did you get what you went for?" Harper nodded, trying to sound braver than she felt. "I got him. Just wait until you see." She opened the trailer door, careful and slow. Embereth hesitated, nostrils flaring, muscles tense. Harper murmured softly, stepping inside the dark with him, her hand outstretched. He sniffed her palm, then, tentative, uncertain, followed her down the ramp into the corral. Her father whistled low, eyes wide. "Lord above, that's the burned Mustang, isn't it? Folks said he couldn't be saved." "He's not just a lost cause, Dad," Harper answered, voice steady. "He's a survivor, like us." Word spread like wildfire. The video of the Mustang bowing to Harper hit social media, racking up likes and incredulous comments. Someone from the auction posted it to the Bitterroot Junction Facebook page. Then the local radio. Then the evening news. Neighbors drove by to stare, some clucking their tongues, others shaking their heads in disbelief. The next morning, Harper woke to find a cluster of cars parked along the gravel road. People milled at the fence line, holding up phones, whispering, half hoping to see the miracle repeated. Harper almost laughed. The town hadn't changed at all, quick to judge, but just as quick to be dazzled by something out of the ordinary. She led Embereth, now quietly renamed Ashwind, in her mind, a name she'd found etched faintly beneath the scars on his brand, into the sunlight. He snorted, pawed at the dirt, side-eyed the crowd. Harper's heart ached at every nervous twitch, but she whispered to him, her words low and soothing. "Easy, boy. It's okay. They just want to see you." One of the local ranchers called out, "Let's see her do the miracle again. Make that wild thing kneel, Missy." Laughter bubbled up, but Harper ignored them. She focused on Ashwind, on the rhythm of his breath, on the small things, the flicker of his ear, the way he shifted his weight, the trust that was slowly, miraculously growing between them. Suddenly, Ashwind startled, A child in the crowd had banged on the fence. For a tense second, Harper saw the Mustang's wildness spark, a memory of pain and fear flaring in his eyes. The crowd gasped, some stepping back, mothers calling their kids. But Harper stood firm, murmuring, "You're safe. I'm here. We're both home now." Ashwin trembled, then, miracle of miracles, lowered his head and pressed his nose into her shoulder. For the second time in 2 days, Bitterroot Junction witnessed the impossible. The hush was electric. Harper looked up at the faces along the fence, some astonished, some moved, a few tearful. She met her mother's eyes, saw pride and fear warring there. The moment broke as the crowd erupted in applause. Phones flashed, voices rose, and the story of Harper and the wild, scarred Mustang took on a life of its own. Back in the quiet of the barn, Harper leaned her forehead against Ashwin's. "We did it, boy," she whispered. "I don't know what comes next, but I think we're going to find out together." The uproar faded, but the memory of that moment lingered like summer heat clinging to dusk. After the crowd finally drifted away, Harper closed the heavy gate behind her, watching the dust settle in the late-day sun. She leaned on the worn fence rail, heart pounding, mind whirling with everything that had happened. For Ashwin, she had started calling him that with increasing certainty. The world was still a dangerous, confusing place. He stood in the farthest corner of the corral, sides heaving, muscles tense. But he watched Harper, those wary, intelligent eyes following her every move. It was as if he wanted to believe in her, even if he didn't know how. Inside the old farmhouse, the kitchen was filled with the smells of cornbread and simmering beans. Her mother, Helen, moved quietly, concern etched in every line of her face. Her father, Earl, had always been the more stoic of the two, but tonight he was full of questions. "You really think you can gentle that wild thing?" he asked, voice soft as he buttered a slice of bread. Harper nodded, though the doubt gnawed at her. "It's not about breaking him, Dad. I just want him to trust again." Helen set a plate in front of Harper, squeezing her shoulder gently. "You always had a way with the broken ones. Even when you were little, you'd spend all afternoon with an injured bird or a lost puppy, doing your best to fix them up." Harper smiled at the memory. The house had always been full of stray dogs, wounded cats, even the occasional orphaned raccoon. She'd spent her childhood in muddy boots and patched jeans, nursing everything that limped or mewed. Horses were her greatest love, creatures of power and grace, but always skittish, always misunderstood. She had learned from her father how to read them, how to wait, how to speak softly and move slow. That night, as the cicadas hummed outside, Harper lay awake, listening to the restless sounds from the barn. She knew Ashwin was out there, pacing, uncertain, caught between fear and hope. She closed her eyes and promised herself she'd give him every chance he deserved. Morning came bright and clear. Dew still clung to the grass as Harper slipped on her boots and headed outside. In the barn, she found Ashwin standing, head lowered, ears flicking nervously. She moved slowly, talking to him in low, gentle tones. "Hey, Ashwin, it's just me, I promise. No loud noises today, no crowds, just us." She carried a bucket of fresh water and a handful of oats, pouring them gently into the trough. Ashwin eyed her warily, but didn't shy away. Inch by inch, she approached, extending her hand, palm open. For a moment he hesitated, then, drawn by some mix of hunger and curiosity, he stepped forward, muzzle twitching as he sniffed her fingers. Harper felt a wave of relief. It wasn't much, but it was a start. The next days fell into a quiet rhythm. She rose with the sun, caring for Ashwin before breakfast, then again at noon, and each evening. She kept the radio low, her voice even softer. She never tried to touch him unless he came to her first. Sometimes she just sat on the rail, reading aloud from old paperbacks, letting her words fill the silence between them. Ashwin began to relax. The hard line of his back softened. His eyes lost some of their wild panic. He'd even take an apple from her hand. Careful, still, but willing. Harper celebrated these victories, no matter how small. Her parents helped as much as they could. Earl mended the broken boards in the old round pen, while Helen brought cool lemonade and words of encouragement. They kept the world away, letting Harper and Ashwin carve out their own fragile peace. One afternoon, a group of neighborhood kids appeared at the fence, eyes wide and hopeful. Harper recognized them from the auction, little ones whose parents had watched the miracle unfold. She waved them over, kneeling down to their level. "Can we see the Mustang, Miss Harper?" a boy named Tyler asked, clutching the rail. Harper smiled. "You can watch, but you have to be quiet and gentle. He's still learning to trust people." The children nodded, pressing close. Ashwin, at first nervous, watched the newcomers with cautious interest, but Harper's calm seemed to settle him. She spoke softly, explaining how to move around horses, how to offer a hand, how to wait for the animal to come to you. To Harper's surprise, Ashwin took a few hesitant steps toward the children. He sniffed at an outstretched palm, then huffed softly, as if resigned to this new curiosity. The kids giggled, delight shining in their faces. That evening, as the sun dipped low, Harper sat beside her father on the porch. Earl gazed out at the barn, pride clear in his eyes. "You're doing something good here, Harper. Folks in town may not understand it yet, but they will." Harper nodded, her heart full. For the first time in a long time, she felt a quiet sense of belonging. She was home, not just in Bitterroot Junction, but in herself. The work was slow, the days sometimes lonely, but each tiny step forward mattered. She found herself sharing more of her story with Ashwin as the weeks passed. She told him about her dreams in college, her failures, her longing to find a place that made sense. She confessed her fears, her regrets, and all the reasons she'd come back. Ashwin listened in his own way, ears twitching, eyes softening, sometimes pressing his head against her shoulder when the words grew heavy. In his company, Harper found a new strength, a deeper purpose. Healing, she realized, wasn't about fixing what was broken. It was about learning to trust again, both herself and the wild, beautiful creature who had trusted her first. By the time summer gave way to fall, Ashwin would allow Harper to brush his mane, even rest her hand on his scarred neck. Some evenings, with patience and gentle encouragement, he let her slip a halter over his head and led him around the corral. He even learned to nuzzle the pockets of her old barn jacket, searching for treats. And though the road ahead was long and uncertain, Harper faced it with hope. Together, she and Ashwin had survived the worst the world had thrown at them. Now, for the first time, they were learning how to live. Mornings on the ranch arrived slow and gentle, a pale pink light brushing the tops of the cottonwoods as Harper stepped outside with a mug of steaming coffee in hand. The old screen door creaked behind her, and the crisp air was rich with the smell of earth, dew, and a hint of horses. For the first time in years, Harper savored the simple beauty of these hours. No blaring city sirens, no anxious rush, just the soft rhythm of the world waking up. Each day, Harper carried that quiet into her work with Ashwind. The Mustang waited for her by the fence now, no longer pressed into the farthest corner. He watched her approach, ears pricked forward, neck arched. Some days he'd even whicker, low and uncertain, as if testing the sound. Harper's heart swelled every time. She found that trust came in tiny increments. Some mornings, Ashwind let her run a soft brush along his neck, his sides still tense but his eyes less wary. Other days, he'd twitch at the lightest touch, taking 2 steps forward and 1 back. Harper learned to accept his moods as they were, a living reminder that healing could not be forced. After chores, Harper would set up a small stool in the shade and read aloud. Sometimes she chose adventure stories, sometimes old ranching handbooks or poetry. The sound of her voice calmed them both, filling the barn with warmth. She liked to believe Ashwind understood, even if only the music of it. Word of the miracle Mustang kept spreading through Bitterroot Junction. Every week brought a trickle of curious visitors, most of them children, sometimes entire families. The first time a group of local kids asked to see Ashwind up close, Harper hesitated, afraid their energy might spook him. But when she looked into their hopeful faces, faces so open, so ready for wonder, she knew she had to let them try. She lined them up at the fence, teaching them to stay still, to keep their voices low. Horses listen better than most people, Harper explained, smiling. You have to speak their language, soft, slow, and steady. Tyler, the bravest of the group, reached out a hand, palm flat. Ashwind's nostrils flared as he sniffed. Then he let the boy stroke his muzzle. The children gasped, delight shimmering in the morning air. For the first time, Ashwind seemed to relax in their presence, as if he understood that these small humans meant no harm. He even accepted a carrot or two, lips tickling little fingers, making them squeal with laughter. Over the next weeks, the visits became routine. Parents dropped off their kids for Mustang lessons, grateful for a safe, honest place to leave them while they ran errands or worked long hours. Harper welcomed the company. She let the children help with chores, filling water buckets, brushing Ashwind's coat, collecting eggs from the chickens. She taught them about patience and boundaries, about how every animal, like every person, needed respect. Ashwind grew braver. He followed Harper around the corral, let her slip a halter over his head, even walked beside her on a lead rope, slow and careful. On good days, he'd accept a child on his back, Harper always close, ready to steady trembling hands. The first time it happened, the little girl giggled, clutching Ashwind's mane, while Harper whispered, "You're safe. We're all safe." The townspeople started calling Harper's place the Miracle Ranch. At first, it was mostly gossip, old ranchers rolling their eyes at the soft city girl with her crazy horse. But the stories kept coming, each one more improbable than the last. Ashwind playing tag with the children in the pasture. Ashwind standing perfectly still while a toddler decorated his mane with wildflowers. Ashwind coming when Harper whistled his name. With every small act of trust, Harper found herself healing too. The bitterness she'd carried from her years away. The ache of feeling like an outsider began to ease. She spent long afternoons riding her old quarter horse, Daisy, while Ashwind watched from the fence. Sometimes she'd walk with him into the open pasture, feeling the grass brush her boots, sun warm on her face, the whole world seeming to open up. Her parents saw the change. Helen smiled more often, her laughter ringing through the kitchen as she baked pies with the neighborhood kids. Earl, who had once been skeptical, became Harper's biggest supporter. He fixed up the barn, rebuilt a broken paddock, and even started telling anyone who would listen about that Mustang with the heart of a lion. One evening, Harper sat in the grass near the barn, her arms wrapped around her knees. Ashwin grazed quietly beside her, close enough she could feel the warmth of his breath. She watched the fireflies spark in the dusk, the distant lights of Bitterroot Junction twinkling across the fields. In that stillness, Harper realized she had finally found what she'd been searching for, not just a sense of belonging, but a sense of purpose. She was helping to mend what the world had broken, and in doing so, she was mending herself. Ashwin lifted his head, nuzzling her shoulder, and for a moment, everything else faded away. The gossip, the old pain, the worries about the future. All that mattered was the quiet bond between them, forged not from force, but from patience, trust, and the unspoken hope that healing was possible for both horse and human. By summer's end, Harper and Ashwin were a familiar sight, walking side by side down dirt lanes, surrounded by laughing children, sunlight tangled in the Mustang's mane. They had become a living symbol in Bitterroot Junction, proof that even the most wounded souls could find their way home. As the golden leaves of early fall drifted across Bitterroot Junction, Harper felt like life was finally settling into something good. Days with Ashwin grew longer and sweeter. Rides at dawn, laughter echoing as children chased chickens in the yard. Quiet nights when Harper could almost forget that trouble ever found her. But shadows have a way of creeping in when the light is brightest. It began with rumors. First, a whispered conversation in the feed store. A ranch hand muttering about old scandals. Someone else shaking their head at that McAllister girl and her wild Mustang. Harper brushed it off, focusing on her chores and her growing circle of young visitors. But she couldn't ignore the feeling in her gut, a prickling unease she hadn't felt since her earliest days back in town. One Thursday morning, as Harper was brushing Ashwin's coat in the paddock, a sleek black truck rolled up the driveway. Its paint gleamed, the chrome grille catching sunlight in a way that seemed almost predatory. The truck stopped, engine rumbling, and for a moment Harper just stared, unease crawling up her spine. A man stepped out. Tall, broad-shouldered, his hat pulled low over ice-blue eyes. His boots were spotless, jeans pressed sharp, and his smile was a cold, practiced thing. Harper knew him instantly. Eldon Cross, owner of one of the largest ranches in the county, and a name whispered with either respect or fear, depending on who you asked. He strolled toward the fence, arms folded, gaze fixed on Ashwin. Well, well. So the stories are true. You really did drag that old nightmare back from the dead. Harper kept her expression calm, but every muscle was taut. His name's Ashwin now. He's not anyone's nightmare anymore. Eldon's eyes flicked to her, amusement and something colder lurking there. You got guts, Harper. But guts won't protect you from the truth. He pulled a folded paper from his pocket, waving it casually. This here says that horse belongs to me. Registered and branded on my ranch. He was a champion before the fire, worth thousands, and a hell of a lot more than what you paid at auction. Harper's jaw clenched. You abandoned him, Eldon. Everyone in town knows about the fire, about the way you left those horses locked in. You're not fit to claim him. Eldon's smile widened, shark-like. Now. No need for dramatics. I got paperwork. You got, what, a story and some Facebook likes? He leaned on the fence, too close, lowering his voice. It'd be easier for everyone if you just handed him over. No one wants another scandal in Bitterroot Junction. Ashwin shifted nervously, sensing the tension. Harper reached out, steadying him with a gentle hand. She met Eldon's gaze, refusing to blink. I'm not giving him up. Not now, not ever. Eldon's smile faded, replaced by a hard, calculating stare. Be careful, Harper. Folks in this town have long memories. Not everyone's on your side. Think about your family, your ranch. Think about what might happen if people start believing the wrong story. He turned and walked back to his truck, boots crunching on gravel. Harper watched him go, her heart thundering. As he drove away, she spotted a few neighbors lingering by the road, eyes wide, phones out. She knew exactly how fast rumors could spread in a town like this. Within days, the gossip swelled like a storm. Some people whispered that Harper had stolen Ashwind, forging documents or tricking the auctioneer. Others dredged up every mistake she'd made as a teenager, every rumor from her years away. Some were old friends, now distant. A few, people she'd trusted, began crossing the street when they saw her coming. Harper did her best to stay calm, pouring herself into ranch work, pretending the stares and pointed comments didn't matter. But every night she lay awake, replaying Eldon's threats, wondering how much more he might try. Her parents tried to shield her. Helen baked pies and brought them to neighbors, hoping to remind people of Harper's kindness. Earl drove into town to speak up for his daughter at the hardware store, but old loyalties to the Cross family ran deep. For Ashwind, the tension was even worse. The Mustang sensed every raised voice, every angry visitor at the fence. He grew restless, pawing at the ground, snorting whenever a strange car appeared at the end of the drive. Harper spent hours in the barn, whispering comfort, refusing to let the fear win. One evening, as the sun dipped low, Harper found an envelope wedged under her front door. Inside was a copy of the document Eldon had shown her at the fence, this time stamped with a lawyer's seal. Scribbled across the bottom was a single line: "Return what's mine or lose everything." Harper stared at the words, her hands shaking. She knew Eldon's threats weren't empty. He had money, influence, and a ruthless streak the whole county feared. The next day, Harper called an old friend who'd become a lawyer in the city, her voice trembling as she explained everything. "We'll fight this, Harper," her friend promised. "Don't let him scare you." But fear wasn't the only thing growing. A few families came by the ranch to show support. Parents who remembered Harper's kindness. Kids who'd fallen in love with Ashwind. They offered food, help, even hugs. It wasn't everyone, but it was enough to remind Harper she wasn't truly alone. Still, as darkness settled over the ranch that night, Harper looked out at Ashwind, standing quiet and vigilant in the moonlight. She knew the storm was just beginning. The mood on the McAllister ranch shifted in the weeks that followed. It was subtle at first. A neighbor who used to wave now looked away. A once friendly clerk at the feed store who rang up Harper's purchases in silence. But beneath the polite surface of Bitterroot Junction, something deeper was breaking apart. It began with the legal papers. They arrived in a thick manila envelope, stamped with the Cross family's attorney's seal, and packed with complicated language that made Harper's heart race. The letter demanded immediate surrender of Ashwind to Eldon Cross, alleging theft, damages, and intentional harm to local business reputation. Harper read every line at the kitchen table, her parents sitting on either side, anger and fear etched into their faces. Helen's hands shook as she reached for Harper's arm. "We have to fight this. He can't just take what's yours." Earl, always a man of few words, stared at the letter for a long moment before quietly leaving the room. When he returned, he brought with him a battered business card, an old friend from his rodeo days. Now a lawyer in the city. "He's tough, Harper. The kind of tough you need right now." Harper made the call that afternoon, voice trembling as she recounted every detail. The auction, the threats, the false documents, the mounting rumors. The lawyer listened in silence, then said, "Send me everything. I'll handle the paperwork. But be careful. Eldon Cross doesn't play fair." Word spread faster than wildfire. By the end of the week, half the town knew Harper was fighting Eldon Cross in court. Sides were quickly chosen. Some of the old-timers muttered that Harper was just causing trouble, risking the peace the town had clung to for years. Others whispered about Eldon's ruthless business tactics and the old scandal of the barn fire he'd never answered for. Harper's friends and supporters gathered quietly at the ranch. They brought casseroles, extra hay, even stacks of legal research printed from the library. The kids kept coming too, some bringing drawings of Ashwind, others just sitting by the fence, hoping for a glimpse of their hero horse. They seemed to sense what adults could not, that the real battle was not just for Ashwind, but for what was right. But for every supporter, there was someone who made things harder. One morning, Harper found her mailbox smashed and a note taped to her gate. "Traitor." At the grocery store, she overheard a former classmate sneer, maybe she should have stayed gone. At church, the pastor offered a prayer for peace in our divided community, but Harper saw Eldon sitting in the front row, his lips curved in a smug smile. The tension boiled over at the county clerk's office, where Harper had gone to file counterclaims with her lawyer. She crossed paths with Eldon's hired men, tall, broad-shouldered cowboys with matching belt buckles and cold, hard eyes. They stood in the hallway, blocking her way, one of them muttering, "You're making a big mistake, girl." Harper squared her shoulders and walked past, refusing to show fear, but her hands shook as she signed the forms. Back at the ranch, Ashwin seemed to sense every shift in Harper's mood. He was more attentive, watching her with deep, searching eyes. When the days were hardest, he would nick her softly, pressing his head against her shoulder, as if offering silent strength. Harper spent long hours brushing his coat, talking to him about everything and nothing. One stormy night, lightning flashing across the sky, Harper sat alone in the barn, listening to the rain drum on the tin roof. She poured her heart out to Ashwind, voicing her fears about losing him, about letting down the children who believed in her, about failing her family's legacy. As she spoke, Ashwin stood still and calm, his breath slow and even, anchoring her through the storm raging outside and within. The community's divide grew sharper with every passing day. On social media, posts alternated between fierce support and angry condemnation. At the coffee shop, regulars argued over whether Harper was a hero or a troublemaker. Even Harper's parents felt the pressure. Old friends stopped visiting, and her mother's phone stopped ringing. But something else began to stir. Small acts of kindness, a pie left on the porch, anonymous donations to cover legal fees, children's letters dropped in the mailbox, reminded Harper that she was not truly alone. A group of parents organized a Support Harper night, inviting neighbors to hear her side of the story. Tears welled in Harper's eyes as she saw the faces gathered on her front lawn, candles flickering in the darkness, voices raised in solidarity. Still, the nights were long and restless. There were moments when Harper wanted to give up, to sell the ranch and leave Bitterroot Junction behind forever. But every time she faltered, she thought of Ashwind, the way he'd trusted her when no one else had, the hope he'd brought to a town so ready to give up on second chances. One afternoon, as she led Ashwind through the pasture, she saw Eldon's truck parked at the edge of the property. He watched in silence, eyes cold, jaw clenched. Ashwind stopped, ears flat, muscles tense. Harper stood tall, calling out, "You're not welcome here, Eldon. You want to talk? Do it in court." Eldon didn't reply, just stared, his threat unspoken but clear. Harper's resolve hardened. She would fight for Ashwind, for her family, and for every person who'd ever been told they weren't enough. She would not let fear or Eldon Cross define her story. The legal battle was far from over, but for the first time, Harper saw a path forward, not just for herself, but for a whole town learning how to stand up to the shadows of its past. Autumn deepened in Bitterroot Junction, the days growing shorter and the air turning crisp. The legal fight over Ashwind raged on, paperwork and rumors swirling like falling leaves. But for Harper, it was the nights that troubled her most. The long, quiet hours when she lay awake, listening to the wind moan across the open fields, heart pounding with worry that seemed to seep from the shadows themselves. One night, just after the first hard frost, Harper was jolted from sleep by a crash outside. For a split second, she thought she'd dreamed it. But then came another sound. A desperate, high-pitched whinny that cut through the darkness like a blade. She bolted out of bed, throwing on jeans and boots, racing down the stairs and across the moonlit yard. The barn door was hanging open, swinging wildly in the wind. Inside, chaos reigned. Ashwind was rearing and snorting, eyes wild, as two shadowy figures tried to corner him in the far stall. "Get out!" Harper screamed, grabbing a pitchfork and charging forward. One of the men spun, cursing as he saw her, and bolted out the side door. The other, bigger and slower, tried to wrestle a rope over Ashwind's neck, but the Mustang snapped his teeth, lunging with a fury Harper had never seen. The man stumbled back, crashing into a stack of feed bags, then fled, knocking Harper aside as he vanished into the night. Breathless, Harper slammed the door and slid the bolt, her heart hammering in her chest. Ashwind was still trembling, foam flecking his sides, but as she moved toward him, his panic faded. He pressed his scarred head against her shoulder, shivering. Harper hugged his neck, fighting tears. I'm here, boy. I won't let them take you." Lights flickered on across the ranch. Her parents came running, along with a few neighbors who had heard the commotion. As Harper described the attempted theft, her hands shaking, her father went to the phone and called the sheriff. It wasn't long before the sheriff's cruiser rolled up the drive, red and blue lights splashing across the front porch. Sheriff Laura Grant, tall, gray-haired, no nonsense, walked the perimeter with Harper, examining the muddy boot prints and the spot where the thieves had tried to cut the fence. "This was planned," Laura said quietly. "They knew which stall. They knew you'd be asleep. I've got my suspicions about who sent them, but I'll need proof." Harper nodded. "It was Eldon, wasn't it? He'd do anything to get Ashwind back." Laura's eyes hardened. "He's been untouchable for years, but even Eldon Cross can't outrun the law forever. Keep your doors locked. I'll have a patrol car swing by at night." News of the attempted theft spread quickly. The story became the talk of the town, some folks blaming Harper for stirring up trouble, others outraged that someone would stoop so low. A few neighbors offered to help watch the ranch at night, while the kids who visited Ashwind started carrying sticks and slingshots, vowing to protect their hero horse. But Eldon wasn't finished. Over the next week, strange accidents plagued the ranch. A gate left open, letting the cattle wander dangerously close to the highway. Nails scattered in the driveway, flattening tires. One afternoon, Harper found the chicken coop smashed and the feed ruined. Each time she reported the incidents, but there were never any witnesses, just more evidence of someone out to break her spirit. Harper fought back the only way she knew, by refusing to give up. She fixed what she could, doubled her efforts to protect Ashwind, and trusted her circle of friends to help. The kids started sleeping over in shifts, determined to stand guard. Even her mother, who'd never been comfortable around horses, took to sleeping on the living room sofa, shotgun propped against the door. One evening, as Harper led Ashwind back to the barn, a wild dog burst from the brush, snarling and snapping. Harper froze, but Ashwind moved with a sudden, fierce grace, charging between her and the animal, rearing high and slamming his hooves down. The dog yelped and fled into the woods. Harper, shaking, threw her arms around Ashwind's neck, whispering, "You saved me. You really saved me." That moment became legend in Bitterroot Junction. The kids couldn't stop retelling it, acting it out in the schoolyard, painting pictures of Ashwind as a guardian spirit. For Harper, the story was more than small-town gossip. It was proof of the bond they'd built, a trust earned through hardship and patience. But the danger wasn't just physical. One night, Harper found a flash drive taped to her front door. On it were files, copies of emails, old photographs, even a forged confession supposedly linking her to the barn fire from years before. It was a crude attempt at blackmail, but it rattled her. Determined not to be intimidated, Harper took the drive straight to Sheriff Grant. The sheriff promised to investigate, and for the first time, the law was visibly on Harper's side. Patrol cars became a regular sight on the dirt road, and the community began to rally in earnest. Then came the breakthrough. Harper's friend from the city, a sharp, determined lawyer, arrived in person, carrying documents that proved Eldon's ownership papers were forged. Together, they met with Sheriff Grant, laying out a timeline of arson, insurance fraud, and animal cruelty tied to Eldon Cross. It was a turning point. The sheriff opened a formal investigation, interviewing former ranch hands and townspeople who had long been too scared to speak. Old secrets surfaced, stories of bribes, threats, and cover-ups going back years. Slowly, the tide began to turn. For the first time since the fight began, Harper felt hope rise like sunrise after a long, cold night. She wasn't just fighting for Ashwind anymore. She was fighting for everyone who had ever been silenced, for every injustice that had gone unchallenged. The bond between Harper and Ashwind deepened through it all. He sensed her resolve, matched it with his own steady courage. Together, they faced each new threat as a team. Underdogs, perhaps, but undaunted. As autumn gave way to the chill of winter, the ranch stood strong. Lights glowed in the barn. Laughter echoed in the kitchen. And in the pasture, Ashwind, once labeled dangerous and worthless, stood tall and proud, a living symbol of what could happen when loyalty triumphed over fear. The final battle was coming, Harper knew. But for the first time, she was ready to meet it head-on, surrounded by friends, family, and the remarkable Mustang who had helped her find her own courage. The first snow arrived early that year, dusting the roofs and pastures of Bitterroot Junction with a soft, clean white. It was the kind of hush that made a town feel smaller, closer, but underneath the quiet lay a tension sharper than ice. The whole county was talking about the meeting called at Town Hall, a public showdown, not just about the fate of a Mustang, but about the soul of the town itself. For days, Harper had barely slept. Her lawyer friend and Sheriff Grant had been working round the clock, gathering statements and evidence. Harper's parents, though weary, stood by her side, their faces determined. Friends and neighbors came by, some shy, some outspoken, all urging her to stand strong. Even the kids who had once come to see Ashwind brought homemade signs. Justice for Ashwind, and let Harper speak. The support gave Harper hope, but nothing could erase the nervous knots twisting in her stomach. The night of the meeting, the parking lot overflowed with trucks and battered cars, headlights cutting through the falling snow. The crowd pressed into the old town hall, coats steaming, boots stamping, the air thick with anticipation and old grudges. Eldon Cross sat front and center, flanked by his lawyer and a handful of ranchers loyal to the Cross name. His smile was cold, thin, unyielding. Harper felt his gaze like a stone in her shoe. Sheriff Grant called the meeting to order, gavel echoing off the wood-paneled walls. "We're here to resolve the dispute regarding the ownership of the Mustang known as Ashwind, and to hear allegations concerning conduct unbecoming of citizens of Bitterroot County. All voices will be heard." Eldon's lawyer stood first, crisp suit and clipped voice filling the room. He laid out their claims: the papers, the supposed ownership, the theft of valuable property, the damage to Eldon's reputation. He brandished documents, pointing to old branding records, receipts, and declarations signed by men who had long owed favors to the Cross family. When it was Harper's turn, her voice was low but steady. She recounted the auction, the state she'd found Ashwind in, the connection she'd felt that day. She held up the auction slip, showing the date and the meager sum she'd paid. Her lawyer presented evidence that Eldon's ownership documents were forged, drawing a collective gasp from the crowd. Then came the witnesses. The auctioneer, a man not known for sentiment, stood and described how no one but Harper had shown Ashwind kindness, how the crowd had jeered, and how Eldon had never come forward to claim the horse until after the video went viral. One by one, townsfolk who had watched the drama unfold added their voices. Neighbors who had seen the Cross men lurking at night, parents who trusted Harper with their kids, and children who shared what they'd learned about hope, patience, and second chances at the ranch. But it was the children who turned the tide. Tyler, the little boy who had first reached out to Ashwind, stood on a chair, sign in hand, and said, "Miss Harper and Ashwind made me believe that broken things can get better. Please don't take him away." Harper's mother spoke of her daughter's lifelong compassion, the way she'd always tried to fix what others gave up on. Her father, voice rough with emotion, said, "Harper saved that horse's life, and he saved hers too. That's not something you can buy or fake." Eldon sat unmoving, jaw set, eyes cold. When it was his turn, he rose with a practiced air of authority. He blamed Harper for the chaos, painted himself as a wronged businessman, and threatened lawsuits against anyone who interfered with his property. He even brought up Harper's years away from home, insinuating she didn't belong. But the evidence was overwhelming. Harper's lawyer laid out a timeline: the fire at Eldon's barn, the suspicious insurance payout, the unexplained absence of proper vet records, and the forged signatures on the papers he claimed proved ownership. Sheriff Grant confirmed that a formal investigation was now underway, citing multiple complaints and corroborating the timeline of threats, sabotage, and intimidation. The room crackled with tension. Finally, the mayor, a quiet, steady woman named June Abernathy, stood and looked out over the crowded hall. This isn't just about a horse. This is about what kind of town we want to be. Do we stand by those who bully and threaten, or do we stand up for each other? A hush fell. Then, one by one, people stood to voice their support. A mother, a teacher, a retired deputy, even the auctioneer, once neutral, said, "Harper did right by that horse. That's more than some folks in this room can say." In the end, the decision was clear. The council voted unanimously. Ashwind was to remain in Harper's care. Eldon was to be investigated for fraud, animal cruelty, and obstruction. As the gavel fell, cheers and applause erupted. Eldon, pale and furious, stormed out of the room, his power broken at last. Harper stood frozen, the relief overwhelming. People crowded around, hugging her, shaking her hand, thanking her for her courage. Her parents embraced her, tears in their eyes. The kids rushed up, chanting Ashwind's name. That night, as snow fell thick and silent, Harper stood at the fence, watching Ashwind graze peacefully under the winter moon. The weight she'd carried for so long finally lifted. She knew there would still be struggles, but for the first time, Bitterroot Junction felt like home. Not just for her, but for everyone who believed that justice, compassion, and hope could win against even the darkest odds. And in the barn, Ashwind, once a symbol of loss and fear, became a beacon of what was possible when truth and love stood together. The morning after the town hall showdown, Bitterroot Junction seemed to breathe easier. Snow glistened on rooftops and fields, every surface sparkling in the pale winter sun. For the first time in months, Harper woke with a sense of peace instead of dread. She lingered under her quilts, listening to the quiet house, letting the sweetness of victory settle deep in her bones. Downstairs, she found her parents at the kitchen table, cups of coffee steaming between them. Helen looked up, her eyes softer, the lines of worry gone from her brow. Earl grunted a morning, but his mouth twitched in the rare beginnings of a smile. "They're saying the Cross Place is swarming with deputies," Helen said. "Eldon's lawyer packed up and left town before dawn. Guess folks finally got tired of his bullying." Harper nodded, pouring herself a cup of coffee, letting the warmth fill her hands. News spread fast. Eldon Cross had been arrested at his ranch, charged with fraud, animal cruelty, and obstruction of justice. The evidence uncovered by Sheriff Grant and Harper's lawyer was impossible to ignore. Old ranch hands came forward, offering testimony about the fire, the forged papers, and years of intimidation. At last, the circle of fear that had surrounded Bitterroot Junction began to break. By noon, Harper's yard was alive with visitors. Neighbors arrived with casseroles and pies, and the kids, once quiet, now emboldened, ran laughing through the snow, chasing each other with Ashwind's old feed buckets as hats. Parents came too, bringing thanks and apologies, some admitting that fear had kept them silent before. Standing on the porch, Harper watched as the kids gathered around Ashwind in the paddock. The Mustang, once so wild and wary, let them stroke his muzzle, braiding his mane with scraps of ribbon and leftover tinsel from Christmas. Harper smiled at the sight, then made her way to the fence. She opened the gate and called softly, "Come here, boy." Ashwind trotted over, ears perked, eyes bright. Harper wrapped her arms around his neck, breathing in his familiar scent, and whispered, "You did it. We did it. You're safe now. Hope." From that day on, she began calling him Hope. It felt right. He was no longer the burned, broken creature she'd met at the auction. He was the heart of a new chapter, not just for Harper, but for the whole town. A week later, Bitterroot Junction celebrated the first of many new beginnings. The council declared a day of hope, closing Main Street for a parade led by Harper and Hope. Kids rode ponies festooned with blue ribbons, their laughter echoing off the storefronts. Parents marched beside them, carrying signs that read, "Justice won," and "Thank you, Harper." The mayor presented Harper with an official proclamation, naming her the legal guardian of hope. For her compassion, her courage, and her unwavering belief that the broken can be made whole, June Abernathy announced, "Harper McAllister has made this town better for all of us." The applause that followed was thunderous, but the celebration wasn't just for show. Real change had begun. People who had once let fear rule them started coming together in new ways. Families volunteered to help at Harper's ranch, repairing fences, painting barns, and building new shelters for animals in need. Parents sent letters of gratitude. The children, especially, wanted to be part of something bigger. It was the children who inspired Harper's next step. One evening, as she watched Hope nuzzle a little girl with Down syndrome, her delighted laughter ringing across the pasture, Harper felt her purpose crystallize. "We need to do more," she told her parents that night at dinner. "Not just for Hope, but for every kid and every horse that needs a second chance." With her parents' support, Harper launched a new program at the ranch, Hearts and Hooves. It offered riding lessons, animal therapy, and after-school care for local kids, especially those who felt out of place or overlooked. Volunteers from the town pitched in, some teaching, others helping with chores, a few just offering friendship and encouragement. The ranch transformed. Where there had once been silence and shadows, now there was laughter, music, and the thrum of new life. Hope became the centerpiece, gentle with the youngest children, proud and strong for the teens learning to ride, patient even with the most nervous volunteers. He seemed to sense which hearts needed healing most. Harper watched it all unfold with gratitude and awe. She worked harder than ever, organizing, teaching, cleaning, comforting. The work was exhausting, but every tired muscle and calloused hand was proof of something good taking root. Sometimes, Harper would find herself standing alone at dusk, watching the sun dip behind the hills, Hope grazing nearby. She'd remember the first days, her fear, his terror, the overwhelming sense of being lost. And she'd marvel at how far they'd come. The ranch became a place of gathering, not just for the town, but for travelers passing through. Word spread about the miracle Mustang and the woman who'd never given up. Donations came in, enough to expand the barn and buy more supplies. Letters arrived from as far as Texas and Colorado, people sharing stories of their own battles, their own hopes. The greatest change, though, was in the town itself. The old division softened, replaced by something stronger, a belief that compassion could overcome even the deepest scars. Neighbors who had not spoken in years shook hands, shared meals, and watched their children play together. Bitterroot Junction began to heal. For Harper, the journey was never just about winning a fight or saving one horse. It was about believing in the power of second chances and daring others to believe too. And as winter melted into spring and the first green shoots appeared on the hills, Harper knew she and Hope had only just begun. Time has a way of turning the bitterest wounds into scars you almost forget you have. As the seasons changed on the McAllister Ranch, so did the heart of Bitterroot Junction. The story of hope, the horse, the miracle, and everything that followed became part of local legend, told and retold over backyard fences, in church pews, and at the corner diner. For Harper, those days sometimes felt like a dream she was living out loud. Early mornings began with Hope waiting by the pasture gate, nostrils flaring in the cool air, his once scarred coat now shining in the sunrise. Harper always paused a moment to watch him, remembering the first day she'd seen him, terrified, battered, labeled worthless. She couldn't help but smile. Every sunrise was a promise kept. But it wasn't just Hope who had changed. It was Harper, too. She moved with a steadiness she'd never known before, purpose guiding every step. She'd found her calling not in grand gestures, but in the quiet daily work of showing up, for herself, for her family, for the creatures and kids who needed her most. The Hearts and Hooves program thrived beyond her wildest dreams. Local teachers sent students who struggled in the classroom. Parents brought children weighed down by loneliness, grief, or fear. Hope greeted each one with the patience only animals can give. Some kids came angry, shut down, silent, but something in Hope's gentle presence drew them out, word by word, touch by touch. Harper witnessed transformations that had nothing to do with riding skills and everything to do with trust. It was during these lessons that Harper found herself reflecting on the true meaning of what she and Hope had accomplished. It wasn't about heroism or even winning against a man like Eldon Cross. The real miracle was in learning how to stand up, not in anger, but in quiet conviction. In the courage to keep loving what the world had cast aside, in the willingness to risk your heart for a second chance. Sometimes she'd share these thoughts with the children and families who gathered at the ranch. Sitting on hay bales, watching Hope graze in the golden light, Harper would speak softly. People say courage is loud, but I don't think that's true. Most of the bravest folks I know don't shout. They just keep showing up. They forgive, even when it hurts. They tell the truth, even when their voice shakes. They help someone else, even when their own life is hard. She paused, letting the silence stretch, the lesson settling deeper than any sermon. You don't have to be the strongest or the fastest to change the world. Sometimes, all it takes is a little hope and a lot of heart. The adults nodded, a few wiping their eyes. The children listened, wide-eyed, as if hearing something they'd always wanted to believe. The town, too, began to internalize these lessons. People remembered how close they had come to letting fear and old grudges win. They talked openly now about forgiveness, justice, and the strength it took to stand up for what was right, even against someone as powerful as Eldon Cross. The scars the town bore, rumors, divisions, betrayals, became stories they could own, not secrets they had to hide. Sheriff Grant became a regular visitor at the ranch, leading outreach for troubled teens. The mayor helped secure grants for the Hearts and Hooves program, ensuring it would continue long after Harper's fight faded from the headlines. Parents volunteered. Ranchers who once scoffed at miracle horses donated feed and equipment. Harper's parents, watching all this unfold, took pride in the changes they saw, not just in their daughter, but in the entire community. Helen often said, "It's like we're finally breathing free again." Earl just nodded. His quiet support a constant Harper leaned on. Of course, not every day was perfect. There were still arguments, still doubts, still moments of exhaustion and frustration. Sometimes Harper would feel the weight of expectations, or catch herself bracing for battles that never came. But then she'd watch Hope, strong, calm, a living testament to resilience, and she'd remember. Healing doesn't mean forgetting the past, but building something better from it. One crisp afternoon, as winter loosened its grip and spring promised renewal, Harper saddled Hope and rode to the edge of the ranch. The fields were bursting with wildflowers, green shoots pushing up through last year's stubble. She felt the horse's muscles bunch and release beneath her, his stride long and confident. As they reached the top of the highest hill, Harper paused, letting the wind whip her hair and Hope's mane. She looked out over Bitterroot Junction, the town that had tested her, broken her, and, finally, embraced her. She thought of all the people who had stepped forward at the town hall, the children who had dared to believe, the neighbors who had learned to trust again. She thought of Eldon Cross, whose fall had freed them all, but whose choices also reminded them how easy it was to let fear rule. And she knew the work would never truly be done. There would always be new challenges, new wounds, new lost causes needing someone to stand up for them. But now Harper faced those challenges with hope, not dread. As the sun dipped low, painting the sky in gold and rose, Harper leaned forward and gave Hope his head. Together they galloped down the hillside, wind singing past their ears, the horizon wide open and shining. In that moment, Harper knew this was the lesson she wanted to leave behind. Redemption isn't a miracle. It's the result of stubborn faith and everyday kindness. True courage is quiet, but it echoes through families, through communities, and through the generations that follow. And long after the story of Hope and Harper faded from front pages and town gossip, it lived on in the children who learned to believe, the neighbors who chose compassion, and the Mustang and the woman who, side by side, proved that second chances can change the world.